So yes, today we're going to be talking about Reformation in the Islamic world in general, but Egypt in particular in the context of the general topic of Copts in Egypt and in their attempt to get equality. But because, as Mike pointed out, I'm going to share with you the quick story that I have, because it actually is the antithesis of what's happening in the Islamic world, because in both cases we're dealing with institutions. So Wednesday, today's Friday, Wednesday I was invited to talk at the U.S. Army War College, essentially the most prestigious military educational center in America, about my book that Mike just showed, Sword and Scimitar, which is a military history. It deals with the battles between the Islamic world and the West for nearly 14 centuries, beginning as far back as 636 AD. And the War College had read it, and according to their emails, they thought it was excellent for their audience, staff, faculty, students. And so, long story short, they invited me, and I accepted, and I was supposed to speak 2 days ago. Then CARE got into the equation, as Mike pointed out, and they just sent out hysterical screeds and petitions and press releases, essentially characterizing me, who, as you know, is of Egyptian descent, as a quote-unquote racist and a white nationalist who is going to try to incite an already white nationalist and racist military to go out and start killing Muslims left and right. So, you know, if anyone were to read that book or have me speak about it, that would be the consequence. And so, sadly, the War College, of all places, actually capitulated to this sort of thing. And in my last conversation with them, I even told them I'd be willing to change my lecture. I was invited to lecture to a debate. And I said, let CARE send any historian to come debate me. And that wasn't good enough either for CARE or the War College. And so it was canceled. And so I tell you this point because we're going to now be looking at the institutions in the Islamic world and how wildly reluctant they are to any talk of reformation, any talk of addressing the root problems that are being inflicted upon religious minorities as the Copts, being traced back to religious teachings in these institutions. And so clearly there's definitely a problem when you have one group is doing all they can to cover up their own inherently intolerant and violent teachings to preserve them, and another group who is so scared to even hear about the reality of that group. And so you can see it's a very bad dynamic between the two. I'll give some very quick preliminary remarks specifically about Egypt, and then I'll introduce our next two wonderful panelists, and they will speak each, and then we'll try to have a quick discussion via Q&A. So Al-Azhar, as you know, in Egypt, the issues with the Copts and what they're suffering, you know, no Muslim is born radical. No Muslim is born thinking Copts or anyone else is second-class citizen. All of this is taught. So you have to go to the foundations. And you can't even really say it's the Quran, because the Quran is taught in a specific way based on the Sunnah, based on the tafsir, interpretations and exegeses by the Muslim scholars. And so all of this coalesces into one word in Egypt, Al-Azhar. Al-Azhar University, or really Madrasa. When you go there, I'm going to give you some quotes about what has been said about Al-Azhar. And as you know, Al-Azhar is often touted everywhere, including in the West, as the most prestigious Islamic university in the world, and also the most authoritative. So, you know, the analogy is not obviously perfect, but it's not unlike saying the Vatican for Catholicism has said X, Y, and Z. That's just sort of how close it is. So first, let me just tell you what has been said about Al-Azhar by people who are trying to reform Islam in Egypt. Lawyer Ahmed Abdu Meher, one time he called for the, and I'm quoting him, for the punishment of those who author books that promote strange and perverse ideas in Al-Azhar. And what are these books? So he gave one example, and he said, quote, "There is a book in Al-Azhar that calls for the forceful shaving of the heads of the Copts, Egypt's indigenous Christians, placing a sign on their homes so Muslims can know where they live for whatever reason, and refusing to shake hands with them." And as you know, all of these things constantly happen. So for instance, putting a sign on the home, you'll recall ISIS, Islamic State, Daesh, was doing that in Syria. They would put the letter Nun, N, Nasara, Christian. And also, there's a Muslim cleric, and there's a video of him who said he's so disgusted of Christians. I forget his name. It's not Yasser Burhani, but someone like him. It's a Salafi. And I can't even touch their hand. That's how I'm disgusted. And even the shaving of the heads, which I just quoted, that Al-Azhar teaches shaving the heads of the Copts, people forget that back in 2013, 100 Copts in Libya were actually abducted by ISIS, and they actually ritually shaved their heads. And no one really connected it to the actual specific teaching, which goes all the way back to Al-Azhar. Remember also when the Jordanian pilot was captured and burned, put in a cage and burned alive and videotaped and all that sort of thing? As many people have pointed out, and I'll quote, for example, an Egyptian journalist, Yusuf al-Husseini, he said after that happened that, quote, the Islamic State is only doing what Al-Azhar teaches. And the simplest example is Ibn Kathir's Beginning and End. That's a multi-volume work that the medieval scholar Ibn Kathir wrote. And it's also a staple at Al-Azhar. It's a mainstream used text. Now you read this Ibn Kathir, which is, well, he's written different books, but this one in particular is a long history. And it's full of pious Muslims, you know, including al-Rashidun, the pious 4 caliphs who are all considered wonderful examples for Islam to follow, engaging in all this sort of behavior. Burning people alive, beheading them, sexually enslaving masses of women and children, selling them on markets, crucifying Christians, burning churches, and all the rest. This is in the book. Okay? Here's another quick one. Political writer many of you are probably familiar with, Dr. Khalid al-Muntasir, once said that Al-Azhar was encouraging enmity, hatred for non-Muslims, specifically the Copts, because he had read a certain book. And this is what he said about this Al-Azhar book. He wrote, quote, is it possible at this sensitive time when murderous terrorists rest on texts and understandings of takfir, which is basically accusing a Muslim of being an apostate, murder, slander, and beheading, that Al-Azhar, it was actually a magazine, Al-Azhar magazine is offering free of charge a book whose latter half and every page, indeed every line, ends with, quote, whoever is a disbeliever, strike off his head. And this is it. And I'll give you another final quote, and this one is very telling. You may recall there is some controversy because many, including many reform-minded Muslims and others, were calling on Al-Azhar to kaffar, takfir ISIS, basically to denounce the Islamic State as not being Muslim. And Al-Azhar refused to do that, simple thing, to say that we denounce them, they are not Muslim, they're infidels, etc., etc. And so a actual graduate, his name is Sheikh Muhammad Abdullah Nasr, and he's a scholar of Islamic law and a graduate of Al-Azhar. He appeared on TV, and I was watching it in 2015. And he was asked, so why won't Al-Azhar to kaffar or denounce Daesh or ICE as being un-Islamic? And this is what he said, quote, it can't, Al-Azhar can't, condemn the Islamic State as un-Islamic. The Islamic State is a byproduct of Al-Azhar's programs. So can Al-Azhar denounce itself as un-Islamic? Al-Azhar says there must be a caliphate, and that is an obligation for the Muslim world to establish it. Al-Azhar teaches the law of apostasy, killing the apostate. Al-Azhar is hostile towards religious minorities, such as Christians and Copts, and teaches things like not building churches. Al-Azhar upholds the institution of jizya, which is basically taking tribute from religious minorities for protection. Al-Azhar teaches stoning people. So how can Al-Azhar denounce itself as un-Islamic? And so his point is well taken. And again, it just shows you that the things that ISIS does, which we are repeatedly told do not represent Islam and have nothing to do with Islam and are just terrorist and criminal activities, here the most prestigious Islamic university in the entire world with the most authoritative voice is using the same sorts of books that teach that. And now you see the connection between the two. So how does Al-Azhar respond to all this? Sheikh Ahmed al-Tayyib, of course, the highest authority on Islam and the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar in Egypt, was once asked about all these questions and why Al-Azhar uses all these books that are creating problems and so forth. And his response as to why he's not willing to reform was rather telling. First of all, he said, Our heritage books, or in Arabic, al-Turath, basically the books of Islam, the Hadith, which is where you get the Sunnah, the teachings of Muhammad, the tafsir, or the exegeses of the Quran and how the Quran should be understood. And so these are basically the staples of Islamic knowledge. These sources form the entire epistemology worldview of Islam, and these are, of course, the books that Al-Azhar uses. So his response was, when asked, why don't you stop using some of these, is our Turath books, or heritage books, as you can translate it, are innocent, and they are being abused by those who are ignorant and indecent among us, being the aforementioned people that I just quoted. And that's all they can be, either ignorant or indecent. And then he continued and said, quote, some say do away with the other ancillary secondary books of Al-Azhar, which is the Turath books. Okay, but then how can I understand the Quran if I got rid of them? And then he explained that if Al-Azhar got rid of these other books, which are needed to explain the Quran, the tafsir, for example, no one would really be able to understand the Quran. And so you can see it's kind of a circular argument where we're at, and one can understand. Oh, actually, here's the most telling portion. I almost missed it. The most telling portion from the Grand Imam Ahmed al-Tayyib was this, quote, when they, reformers, say that Al-Azhar must change the religious discourse, this too, I mean, I don't know, what does that mean? It's tilting at a windmill, this change religious discourse. And he kept basically attacking and mocking the idea. And then he said, Al-Azhar does not change any religious discourse. Al-Azhar proclaims the true religious discourse, which we learned from our elders, the Turath. And so, as you can see, Al-Azhar has no intentions of reforming, changing, jettisoning any of the teachings in these highly problematic books. And these books are the ones that teach all the things that the Copts and other religious minorities are suffering at this very moment. So that's the one of the major problems going on. And as I said, it's not, Muslims are not born this way. This is what they're taught. And so when we really reach to the foundation, it becomes these institutions. And I mentioned Al-Azhar because, of course, it's the one that's most important in Egypt, in fact, in the whole world. And so these are some of the topics that the panel and I will hopefully discuss, and generally the broader idea of, is Reformation in Islam even a possibility? What would it look like? What is it? So without further ado, I'm going to introduce my two fellow panelists. The first one is Imam Muhammad Tawhidi, at the very end there. He is an Australian Muslim scholar, publicly ordained Islamic authority, educator, speaker, and one of the leading voices in the global movement of Islamic reform. But I think as you listen to him, you'll see he has a very unique take and a very important one to listen to. He was born in the holy city of Qum, Iran, into a spiritual family with a history of decades of participation in Islamic seminaries, and has memorized much of the Quran by the age of 10. Imam Tawhidi returned to Australia in 2015 after his journey in the Islamic seminaries of Iran and Iraq. Now he has dedicated his life to ideologically tackling the spread of Islamic extremism, as well as defending the rights of religious minorities in Muslim-majority nations. Since Imam Tawhidi will go first, I will introduce Brother Rashid afterwards, after his speak, and then we'll have a debate and a Q&A. So, Imam Muhammad Tawhidi.
Thank you. Hello, infidels. That's my signature opening now. Everywhere I go, it's Jews or Christians, that's how I open with. You know, a smile is really good. We're all equal. I am also considered an infidel by Al-Azhar, so, and Qom, so we're all equal here. Thank you very much, Brother Raymond, for the opening, very insightful, and for the very warm introduction of myself. I thank you for that. And I really look forward to learning from you, as well as from my brother Rashid. Greetings, everybody else, honorable audience. I'm very delighted to be here, and thank you very much for having me, for the invitation, my absolute honor. Now, I get invited to address many issues with the Jewish community, Christian community, and you know, every community has its own issues, but with the Coptic community, It's more of a very personal issue. It's not an interest, it's a personal issue. From a very young age, all of our doctors have always been Coptic doctors. And when I travel, my personal doctor is a Coptic Christian. And alongside all of that, my biggest support base from within the Arab-speaking communities around the world, whether it be the intellectuals or people within universities or just regular students, have always been, the majority of them have always been the Coptic community. And that is very telling because, you know, when you've been through that lifestyle in Egypt and you see what the rest of the world, well, the extremist world does to you, and then they see them doing that to me, it's sort of, there's a serious connection there that reminds them of what their parents went through, and they don't want to see me go through all of that. So now I have a wonderful community of Coptic Christians that, you know, I can't live without. So it's a very personal issue for me when I hear that Coptic Christians have been killed or attacked. And I write regularly about the persecution of Coptic Christians for Al-Bawaba. You can read my articles over there. When the churches are attacked, I'm never late to release a statement, and also been in touch with certain Coptic leaders around the world to see how we could collaborate and really not just talking about taking down the extremists, but actually do the work that needs to be done. I'd like to speak very briefly about my story, and then I will get into a bit of my line of thinking before I return back to the panel. I was born in Iran just after the Iranian Revolution, and we moved to Australia. In 2007, so basically I finished my initial studies in Australia, and then in 2007 I returned back to Iran. It was a trip. I wasn't supposed to stay. It was just my father thinking that, you know, if 20 boys went back to Iran, you know, when you're young and your parents don't want you to be mixing with the filthy you know, the filthy community outside, they take you to Mecca, they take you around so you can somehow get an update, you know, of what's happening, the latest update, you know. So I went to Mecca, did all of that, and then we went to Iran. Now, Iran was a trip that was led by my father's student. My father was also a cleric, a senior cleric. And when we got to Iran, you know, we had our Quran studies and other historic studies, whether it be jurisprudence, the seerah of the Prophet, and so on, and mainly focused around the Persian brand of Islam, which, you know, it assists you when you're there because you feel that you're in a country, it's all about the revolution, all about maintaining the revolution, you have ayatollahs all over the place, so very religious atmosphere. And so, you know, it was nice, and then the month finished, and all of my friends returned back, 20 people, 19 of them returned, I was the only one that stayed. And my dad's like, that wasn't the plan, you need to come back here and finish your studies here. And I said, no, I want to stay, and I'm going to continue with my religious studies. Anyway, I had to eventually go back, pack up, reapply for the appropriate visa, and I did. Again, I was born in Iran, as I said, but I went in as an Australian citizen to avoid the military you know, obligation that you had to go and serve. So we got all of that done, and I stayed in Iran until 2013. I fell out with the regime and the members of the regime. I was very close to them, and I moved to Iraq, simply because I am part Iraqi, and I'm a citizen, I can stay there. And also Najaf and Karbala are the holiest cities to study in, even more holier than Qom. So I went to my advanced studies in Najaf and Karbala, and all of a sudden in 2014 ISIS takes over, members of my family get killed, my dearest uncle gets kidnapped and burnt alive. He was part of the Iraqi army hoping to liberate Mosul. This was the time where I felt very lucky. I had an Australian passport, I could leave the country. Most of the airports were closed because ISIS were shooting down airplanes with RPGs. Long story short, I make it back to Australia, very devastated. I've been on a very long journey between Iran and Iraq, been through a lot, worked for plenty of ayatollahs, seen what ISIS did to my family, and now I have a question. What do I do? Do I just continue my life as a cleric, as an imam, or do I try to change the situation? Not change the world. I can't change the world. And whoever tells you I'm here to change the world, no. I can make a dent. I can challenge a narrative. I can shut people down. I can close extremist centers. I can make laws and I can change laws with my work. So can I change the situation at least on a local level? Is this possible or not? Many people were criticizing me at first when I began criticizing the extremists, saying, well, you're Muslim. Here's the question I ask myself. So is the only solution that 1.8 billion people all have to convert and leave their religion? Is this the only solution? 1.8 billion people, whether you be religious or non-religious, or whether you just be born into a religion, maybe born in Somalia, you can't even read the Quran. Maybe born in Malaysia, you don't even know. So the only solution that we have, is it right to say that 1.8 billion have to convert to the religion that we believe in? So the Christians will say they have to convert to Christianity. And the Jews will say they have to convert to Judaism. And the atheists will say they have to leave all religion completely. So what is the real solution for all of this? So I believe that the first step was to grow a media platform, which I did. The second issue was I need to make my position very clear. I need to highlight what the problems are, what I'm speaking about. I need an actual book. So I wrote a book and I named it The Tragedy of Islam. Why? Because if Islam was a man and we asked him, what's your problem? What's your tragedy? Why all of this? He would point to the problems that I pointed in the book. Theological aspect, historical aspect, jurisprudential disasters, the fatwa disaster, so on and so forth. But the problem was, in today's publishing mafia companies, they will only publish what they want to be published, not what the people need to know and need to read. 18 publishers, giant publishers, refused to publish my book. And I said to them, you publish for Salman Rushdie. You won't publish mine? Again, political correctness has now taken over. They will not publish my book. They said, we'll publish certain conditions. Remove this page, don't speak about this person, don't speak about that. Legal issues, put quotation marks, put the word allegedly, and so on and so forth. I said, I'm not going to change one word. Will you publish or not? 18 said no. So it was a Wednesday morning. And I said, I'm sick and tired of this. Where's my jeans? By the way, I wear jeans. I said, where's my jeans? I went to my, got dressed in my jeans, went to my accountant. I said, I'm making a publishing company. And he said, what? Every day I have a new project for him. I said, I'm making a publishing company. Are you sure? I said, I'm definitely sure. I'm making a publishing company. And I'm going to call it Reason Books International. So he said, fine. We registered the publishing company. It was a Wednesday morning. Wednesday evening, I published my book. Let me finish. Wednesday evening, I published my book. Amazon held it for 2 days. For 2 days. I said, okay. Finally, the book was live for people to buy. In 6 hours, 6 hours, my book became a national bestseller. I outsold and outranked Michelle Obama on the Australian charts. In 6 hours. Right? No one was behind me. All of the extremists were saying, see, the Mossad, and behind him the Mossad, and the CIA, and the FBI, definitely. How can he? Michelle Obama, all the big agents and the... Anyway. So I proved to the Muslims who are like-minded but scared to write because it might fail. Scared to speak out because maybe people will think they're a fake. I proved to them that you could come all the way and do exactly what I did and get published and become successful. And now you don't have to go through all of this. Now you have a company that will publish for you. But the main issue, before I return back to the panel, was, can we really bring a change? The American reformers, who some of them were mentioned earlier today, they published a long article the Asia Times calling me a radical with a different flavor, calling me ISIS, accusations left, right, center. I sued, we won, we got the article taken down. But the point was, if you are real, then you have to join us, because we are the real reformers. We are the reform movement. You can't be alone. If you are real, then pledge allegiance to our reform khilafah. So I said to them, okay, I bought a ticket from Australia, came to America, let's see. Where is your reform mosque? Doesn't exist. Where is your reform Muslim community? It doesn't exist. Have you reformed one person? He doesn't exist. Okay, show me a fatwa that was issued to killing the Christians that you were successful in getting it withdrawn from the mufti. Have you reformed one fatwa? No. Do you have any work? Do you have a proper agenda? Do you have an actual source? In religion you have to have a marja, an actual source that you refer to, so people can understand where your ideology stems from. Do you have that? Don't have it. Okay, so what do? We're on Twitter, and we're on Facebook, and we're funded by the Jewish community. I said, what is batikh? Why are you wasting my time? Why are you wasting people's time? Is this religion, or what are you selling tomatoes? This is an ideology that's killing people, because it comes from Mecca and Al-Azhar and Qom. And I am a victim of indoctrination, and I am now realizing what's happening, and I'm telling you, you need to wake up. And you're sitting in Arizona, you want to reform Mecca. Don't waste my time. Don't waste my time. So I went independent, and I have now, I'm working on establishing my own organization, but the main point is, Islam cannot be reformed. I did believe it can, but I saw that when you say you want to reform Islam, everyone who's against Islam all of a sudden wants to help you. You can't convince a Muslim. You need your credibility. You need credibility. You can't convince a Muslim that they need to leave Al-Bukhari when you are funded by the Zionists. You can be a Zionist, no problem. You can say Israel, whatever you like, be whoever you like. But to the extremist Muslim, when you say you're a Zionist, if you read the Quran, he will say it's a lie, because you're a Zionist. He won't listen. If you read the Quran, he won't listen anymore, because you're a Zionist. So you can't do that. You have to be very well strategic about your mission, and you have to be realistic. Islam, I realize, cannot be reformed. Imam Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet himself, said, I'm going to reform the religion. They butchered him. Who? The Muslims. Not the Jews, not the Christians. If he can't reform, what am I going to reform? The point is, it's not going to happen. Therefore, we need to be realistic, and we need to deal with the situations that we have at hand when they arise. That's how I believe the work should be done. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Imam Muhammad. Very sobering thoughts, all of which I agree with, by the way. The question of reformation of Islam, in fact, I'd like to give you a quick analogy before our next panelist that I think I've always found helpful, because a lot of Americans will often say, look, Christianity reformed, the Reformation, the Protestant Reformation. So in this context, the Catholic Church had its doctrinal problems, and then the Reformation came, and now, lo and behold, look, we have good Protestant Christianity. This is a very popular notion. And so people will ask me, well, why can't the same thing happen to Islam? What they don't understand is this sudden burst of radicalization that you're seeing is the Reformation of Islam. Because if you apply the model of what Christianity went through from Catholicism to Protestantism, you will see that actually that radicalizes. Because what happened with Catholicism, from Catholicism to Protestantism, basically it was the idea of sola scriptura, the Bible alone. That's what the Protestant reformers said. They said, we're not going to listen to any of your, the popes or just the hierarchy or the clerics. We're not interested in your particular slant or edicts. We are going straight to the text, the Bible. And we're going to read it, and we're going to follow it. And that was that. And you got Protestantism, which, of course, didn't become an anti-infidel jihad religion. But what happens when Muslims say, as they have been now, especially in the age of the internet, where everyone has access to all the Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, and they have all access to the Tafsir and all the access to the Seerah and the Quran, Whereas in former centuries, your average Muslim was illiterate. He just was told what he was told by the local imam or sheikh. So now, to me, actually the analogy is you have a lot of Muslims who are going straight to the primary texts, just like the analogy of the Bible. Now they're going just straight to the Quran and the Sunnah and so forth. And those texts happen to be antithetical in many ways to the Bible. And so that's why you get an antithetical response. And so if I'm just reading the Bible and I'm not following any teaching or any listening to any sermons, and I'm reading about turning the other cheek and forgiving and so forth, okay, you can see where that results. But if I'm reading a book without any guidance and it's telling me kill the kafir, fight the infidel, fight the people of the book till they pay jizya, whoever leaves his religion, kill him, that's pretty straightforward. And so that's why I also agree with Imam Muhammad's Tawhidi that I find it very difficult for Islam to reform, and if anything, especially when you apply the Western Christian model, which most people think will happen, if anything, that is happening, and it's led to what we're seeing, actually. The culmination, in my opinion, is ISIS. So let's now move on. Our second speaker is Brother Rashid, and he is an author and scholar of Islam. Brother Rashid was born in Morocco to a conservative Muslim family. He has since converted to Christianity. He is one of the most outspoken converts in the world. He hosts a weekly live call-in show on Al Hayat TV, where he compares Islam and Christianity, as well as debates Islamic scholars. Many of you have seen him on TV for probably at least a decade. He used to have the show Su'al Gareed, daring question, where of course he always asked the critical questions revolving our topics. And he didn't really get many answers. So without further ado, please give a warm welcome to Brother Rashid.
Thank you.
It's very good.
Well, good morning. I'm sure you're tired and ready to eat lunch. So I will make it quick and precise and to the point. Well, thank you for having me here and thank you for inviting me. It's an honor. Let me start with the idea of reforming Al-Azhar, for example, as the biggest institution in the Muslim world. Can we reform Al-Azhar? The problem with reformation, it's linked to reforming Islam. It's different, but it's linked. Reforming institution, it's linked to reforming Islam. Because Al-Azhar is not teaching biology, for example, is teaching products that are Islam, what we call Turat Islami or the Islamic heritage. It's all of it. It's all of Islam. It's the Quran, it's the Hadith, it's the Seerah, and all these. So to reform Al-Azhar, we have to reform the content, what they are teaching to other people. And there are problems with the reformation itself. There are problems with the notions, definitions. Let's start with the definitions. The word reform comes from Latin. It means change or reshape. It's changing a shape. In Arabic, it means islah. It's different. Islah is to bring something to its working state, the original state. It was made originally working, but something happened, it broke, and then you're bringing it to a working shape. Tuslah as-sayara, fixing the car. The car was working, but you fixed it. You brought it to original shape. Can we reform Islam? Can we reform Islamic institutions, since they are both linked? Well, it's like saying bringing Islam to its original shape, to a working shape. What if the original shape was not working? What if it was deformed from the start, from the beginning? It was born deformed. You cannot reform something that was born deformed. And here we go to some problems that were mentioned by our panelists here. There are 4 mistakes. Those who believe in Reformation, they have 4 fundamental misunderstandings. First, they assume that all religions are the same. They are good in their core belief. They are born good. And they are for the good of humanity. But later on the course of history, they have been changed or altered by politicians, by different people. And that's what made them evil. They put Christianity with Buddhism, with Islam, everything in one basket. And that's wrong. We cannot approach religions with the same mentality. They are not the same. There are some religions, they are peaceful from the start. There are other religions, they are not peaceful. They are violent from the start. There are religions where the leader was peaceful. There are religions where the leader was violent. There are religions that the first community was peaceful because the first community represents what religion is. Texts are just texts. But the application of those texts on the ground tell us what religion is. Let's say Christianity was practiced by the first apostles and the first disciples. Islam was practiced by the first Muslim community. What if the first community was violent? So bringing Islam to its first shape is actually, that's what we call Wahhabism and Salafism. And it will not give us a better results. It will give us probably a disaster. The second problem is comparing Islam to Christianity. Since the Reformation was successful with Christianity, either through Protestants or through Catholics, because there are Catholic Reformation as well. So because it was successful, then it must be successful with Islam. Well, that has an assumption that Christianity is like Islam and the West is like the East, and that's not happening. It doesn't exist. The West is not the East, and Christianity is not Islam. And Jesus is not Muhammad, and the Bible is not the Quran. We have main differences that will be an obstacle in front of Reformation. The third problem is the wishful thinking. I wish that Islam can be reformed. I hope, I pray. But is it going to happen? That's a different story. People in the West, they wish that Islam can be reformed. And because they have this wishful thinking, they want it to happen, and they encourage everybody who says, I am a reformist. I want to reform Islam. They encourage him, they clap for him, and they bring him to the front stage because they want that to happen. But on a pragmatic level, it's not going to happen. It's just wishful thinking. The problem has another minor problem in it. The idea of reforming something is easier than confronting the whole thing. So since it's easier, we prefer reformation. Confrontation is not welcome, especially in the West. A person like me is labeled like Imam Tawhidi, like Raymond Ibrahim, like many others. We are labeled as bigots, haters. Why? Because we confront the problem. We don't play political correctness. So when you don't play with the system, there are people, they want and they wish it's going to be reformed. If you say no, then you are a bigot. You are from the other side. People, I appreciate that Coptic Solidarity invited me. But because inviting people like us probably will put you in trouble as well. You will be labeled as well. Not many people like to invite people like us. Why? Because it will cause problem. It's not comfortable to confront Islam, to tell 1.5 billion that your religion has a problem in the root. It's not cosmetic. It didn't happen through history. It's from the beginning, and you have to deal with it. That's a hard message. Not everybody willing to embrace it. The fourth problem is we have some reformists. And we think they are going to reform Islam. In the West, I don't want to put names, but you know them. You can see them on CNN, on other stations,
Fox.
On Fox as well. You see them everywhere. And I liked your questions when you asked, do they have at least one mosque? You can call it a reformist mosque. Do they have a reformed Quran? Do they have a reformed hadith? A reformed biography? Zero. They didn't change, they are not changing the Muslim world. They are changing the Western world. So they are doing the opposite of what they are claiming. They are popular among Westerners, but they're not popular among Muslims. So the change, if it's happening here among those who do not need change. It's an opposite reformation, actually. Or actually, it's selling a product that people want to buy, but it's not a real product. It's selling you what you wish. You wish Islam to be reformed? Yes, we can reform it. When? Allahu A'lam. Those guys, I can name them. They are just, you can count them. They are not many. And they are considered non-Muslims. They are considered apostates. They are not welcomed. And they are not making any change whatsoever. Am I saying that we should convert every Muslim as a solution, as my brother Imam Tawhidi mentioned? No, I'm not saying that. I said I choose Christianity for myself. I recommend it for people who want to leave Islam, but I'm not saying that's the only solution. The solution is we have first to diagnose the problem, to say what's the problem. Is it to reform Islam? Or to say what Islam is first. Where is the problem? Is it in Al-Azhar or in the product that Al-Azhar teaching? Is it in the text or what happened through history? I think it is in the root. It is in the religion itself. How to deal with it then? Well, there are some solutions. One of them, it's happening actually. Until 1961, slavery was allowed in the Muslim world. We didn't reform Islam to change slavery. We just forced the Muslim world to follow the international laws to abandon slavery. Do they still have it in the text? They still have it. Are they able to apply it on the ground? No. Let's say hand amputation, lashing people, stoning people. Did we achieve that by reforming Islam? No, we didn't. Do they still believe in it? Yes, they do. Does the Quran still have those texts? Yes. How did we achieve that? In Egypt, for example, they don't stone somebody who committed adultery. They don't cut the hands of a thief. They put him in jail. In Morocco, the same thing. How did we achieve that? By forcing them to follow the international laws. By disabling those texts. If you want to pray to your God using those texts, you're welcome. Go do it. But you cannot apply it on the ground. Because it's inhumane. It's not welcomed internationally. So how are we going to achieve it? By forcing Muslim countries to embrace the international human rights. By separation between the state and religion. By respecting religious freedom. They are not going to attain it through reformation but by people like you and by countries like United States making Muslim world submit to the international community. That's how we are going to achieve results. In Morocco, for example, they could have killed apostates like me. They can't. Not because they don't believe in it. No, because they are afraid of the international community. So we can make some changes, but not through reformation, but through people like you and through countries in the Western world. Well, thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you very much, Brother Rashid. I'd like to make a quick comment on something you said, in which I completely agree with, and which I think is very important. American Muslim reformers and their absolute inefficacy in the Islamic world. The phenomena of these American reformers who, as they were mentioning, appear on Fox News, CNN, and so forth, the problem with them, I don't know what's in their heart, and I'm not trying to say they're lying or they're not true reformers, but what I do know is they're talking to the wrong audience.
Yes.
They exist exclusively to talk to Americans and Western people and to give them hope. But in the real world, in the Islamic world, in that other 1.6 or whatever billion, they have zero influence. And it's worse than that because they give a false sense of hope. Because as long as Americans hear them left and right, always on CNN and Fox News, they feel there's still some hope. Because look, there's this person, that person, they're saying this. Hopefully they'll be able to have influence on whoever, but they don't. As was mentioned, there isn't even one single reformist mosque in America. So what are they going to do in Mecca? What are they going to do in Pakistan? What are they going to do in Afghanistan and Turkey and sub-Saharan Africa? They have no efficacy, but the point is they give hope, and that's why they continue to exist. And then the other point, which is actually related, that Brother Rashid said, is the idea of reform, and how when you go back to Islah in Arabic, it basically means to bring back to its original form. And that in fact, but what if the original form was already problematic to start with? And this is why actually the heart of this, you have to understand, one of the things that we never talk about and that we should talk about, and why CARE, speaking of my incident with CARE and the War College, got very angry, is history. Because history is the absolute proof of the doctrine. When you come up to an American and you say Quran XYZ says this, or this scripture says that, the American mentality is very relativistic, and it understands that, you know what, well, we have the Bible, some people believe it this way, some people believe it that way, this verse means that. Amongst the Jewish community, there's the Orthodox, there's the Reformist, so it doesn't really matter what the Quran says. But to me, I've always found it more important and fascinating, well, what has history shown? And what history has shown is an unwavering line of straight continuity from the time of Muhammad till the present of these problematic Quranic teachings of jihad, of subjugation of infidels, of misogyny, anything you can think of, it has shown up in history. And it's even more than that. Most people maybe in this room are aware of Arabic history, or the Arab invasion of Egypt, for example, or the Arab conquest. Some might be familiar with the Ottomans, or some might be familiar with Spanish history and so forth. But the actual truth, and in fact that's what I did in my book, is if you look from the beginning to the end, whether in its Arab manifestation, whether it's in its Berber manifestation in North Africa, whether in its Turkic manifestation, Persian manifestation, Tatar or Mongol manifestation, all these are different ethnicities and nationalities around the world that attacked the Christian world throughout history. And they spoke different languages, they had different customs, but they were all Muslims. They articulated their war on Europe, Christendom, in jihadi terms. They quoted all those doctrines that we're talking about, and they did all the things that ISIS did. So basically think of ISIS, but on an exponential level, going on for well over 1,000 years, bombarding Europe and other non-Muslim regions from every corner. Not many people know Islamic slavers from North Africa went as far as Iceland as early as the 16th century and 17th century to get slaves, and from Iceland, and they brought them and sold them in the markets. The United States of America's first war as a nation was with Islam. It was with those same Barbary pirates who were enslaving American sailors. And when Thomas Jefferson and John Adams met with the ambassador of Barbary and asked him, "Why are you attacking our men? What have we done to you? We're not your enemy." What did he do? He quoted the Quran, and he said, "Our holy book, our holy prophet say you are infidels, you are sinners, and therefore we are obligated to attack, kill you, enslave you, and basically ISIS you." So if you look at history, it is one long record of ISIS, and that's why I think it's very important to keep in mind, because when we just talk about doctrine, and I think doctrine is important, of course, here in the Western mentality, it's able to get away with it, and it just ignores it, because we have our own. What about the Old Testament? Well, what about Joshua? What about the wars of genocide that Joshua did? These are usually the retorts that one gets. And of course, there's an easy answer to that, because the Old Testament wars are not sunnah. They are a history. They're just recorded. They happened. It doesn't mean we are following the sunnah of Joshua and we must exterminate. So there's definitely an answer to it. But, and they're trying, and the reason people have hope in this Reformation is because the current narrative, historical narrative that dominates academia, which is a pseudo-history, teaches, as Brother Rashid was saying, that from the start Islam was good. And so there is reformation possible. They teach that Islam spread peacefully through trade, and they talk about Andalusia, Spain, and how supposedly there was a wonderful culture, it was multicultural, etc., all of which are lies and have been debunked very recently, actually. So they need to keep that first premise alive, that Islam historically was a good, tolerant, progressive force. Because as long as you keep that premise alive, you have to keep asking those questions that became so popular after 9/11. Namely, what went wrong? Why do they hate us? The reason people were asking these questions is because they're ignorant of history and they're convinced that Islam used to be good. But when you understand that from the start, that it was already, we can say, deformed, not already formed so that we can reform it. It already had problems. When you understand that and see it was a non-stop ISIS-like aggression for well over a millennium, all the questions, what went wrong and why do they hate us, are no longer needed. But as long as that history is not known and we ask these questions, that's why all of our security analysts and great thinkers are convinced that the problem with the Islamic world has to do with education, economics, poverty. It has to do with social, political grievances. Because they're taught Islam historically was good, but historically it was just like ISIS. And I think once people learned that, we will even have a stronger a tool in our arsenal alongside the doctrinal issue. So I'll stop with that and take some questions now. And I think they've been brought to me. Okay. So I see a question, I'm not sure who it's addressed to. It says, what do you think about the future of care after 20 years? Would one of you care to answer that question? How about you, Imam Tawhidi, since I understand, is it true also, are you trying to form a sort of counter care?
Yes, but I'm not speaking about it much in full detail now, but we do have that on the agenda. Basically, the issue of care is that the white people, let me say it this way, and whenever I sit with them, I say, you white people, they say, you're the only guy that earned this. You can say it, nobody else can say it. But I say this. And they appreciate it because I'm being honest to them. Why do you think we need special treatment? Who told you? I don't understand it. Why? What's this thing inside you that really makes you feel that because I look like this, I need your special treatment and I'm expecting it from you? Why? And not everyone, but you know, the people in power. Why? Where does that come from? I don't know. I really don't know. Because for us, we have bigger things to worry about. Where we come from, you go out, you don't know if you're going to come back to your family. When I'm talking to you as a man to man. If you're here to bother me and my family, I'm not going to give you a platform. CARE has a charter of the Muslim Brotherhood.
they have been, they've been labeled by a US federal court in investigations. They have links with Hamas, who you consider to be a terrorist organization. You have all the evidence. I don't need to tell you. You have them all, think tanks, they're all writing. But they're still operating as though they are legitimate and as though they're not terrorists. They are. They are. A terrorist doesn't mean that you have to have a tank or a bomb. No, if you have a terrorist ideology, the only difference between you and ISIS is the gun. The only difference between you and Al-Qaeda is the fact that you haven't yet decided to wage jihad. That's the only difference. You hold the same ideology, same agenda. And the Muslim Brotherhood Charter is not condemned by CARE. So we're speaking now, and there are people sitting in Washington on the Hill, about whether Muslim Brotherhood should be designated as a terrorist organization, and this has a direct link with the future of CARE, because that is the umbrella. If you can designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization, you will have no difficulty in proving that CARE is advocating for the very same agenda of the Muslim Brotherhood. This is alongside the financial tracks and the invitations of who they bring and who they defend and the lawsuits. That is just an extra topping. But in essence, you can prove that this is the Muslim Brotherhood with a different logo. And this is how the Muslim Brotherhood operates. It has been operating like that around the world. The Muslim Brotherhood said that they needed a wing for their organization in the Palestinian region, and they called it Hamas. They can use different logos, no problem. But that is the future of CARE. If we can seriously step our game up, and for the people on the Hill to literally wake up, these people, you're giving them democratic rights, they don't believe in your democracy, not for 1 second. They will not let you live in your democracy in peace if they get their way. Look at Ilhan Omar. I can bring her name up. This and Linda Sarsour. I love this lady. Do you know these women? They are assets, and we need them. We need Ilhan. I criticize her, but I need her because she's honest. She will tell you the US troops are terrorists for killing Somali terrorists. They're the terrorists. We need someone like that because she's not acting. These reformers, they are acting. They're actresses and actors. We need someone who we can pinpoint. See that she now has the power and the funding and the money, and she doesn't need anybody's approval. She's an independent Islamist with a militant ideology. This is their true color. Let her speak. Rashida Tlaib has gone a bit quiet because she's smart. She wants Ilhan to be the voice. But no, we need them. We need them there so the people can see what they're like and what will happen if they get into your governments. And which is why you see the conservative revolution now in the EU Parliament and London and so on. What happens in the USA sets the narrative. The future of CARE designate the big umbrella as a terrorist organization.
Thank you very much. By the way, Linda Sarsour, who I can't really say her name often without laughing because unless my Arabic is wrong, her last name means cockroach.
Yes, and it's an insult. It's an insult to cockroaches. Cockroaches. No, seriously, cockroaches will not want to annihilate an entire nation from the river to the sea. They do not want to kill or butcher people. They bother you because they're fast, but they will not wish death upon anybody else. But from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. If they can name what river and what sea, they have my vote.
By the way, for the record, Linda Sarsour is the one that wrote a hysterical petition begging Muslims to sign to get the War College to disinvite me. And basically, she's the one who wrote that if I get the opportunity to talk about history in front of military men, they will go out and kill Muslims everywhere in the streets of America. She literally wrote that in her group, Empower Change. Yeah. Anyway, thank you, Imam Tawhidi. Okay, Brother Rashid, here's a question for you. Islam is trying to change in international law, or can Islam change in international law, which is, I think the question is what you said about international law somehow being, Islam needs to adopt it so that in as much as they can believe whatever they want, but when it comes to international law, they have to adhere to those standards.
Yeah.
So I think the question is, how possible is that realistically?
Of course, Saudi Arabia especially is trying to change that, and they are trying to pass legislation to ban criticizing religious symbols, and especially they make it for all religions, but we know they mean Islam, so they just include other religions because they will not care about them later, but they have to put them to make it look like it's defending everybody's beliefs, and at the end they want to protect Islam. So so far they are not successful, but they are trying to pass laws to ban people like me from even saying that there is something wrong with Islam or its symbols. And I hope they will not succeed. If they succeed, then we will be all in trouble.
Thank you, Brother Rashid. Okay, next question to Imam Tawhidi. You are always saying that Islam cannot be reformed, but that Muslims can. As an ex-Muslim myself, who was very devout, don't you think that this approach only confirms to Muslims that there is hope in hanging on to Islam, that it can be made to become peaceful as opposed to just leaving it altogether?
Who's going to leave? Which Imam? Don't tell me one guy left or Brother Rashid left. You know, which Imam is going to leave? Which Grand Ayatollah is going to leave? Do you want just to tweet about it, someone left, or do you want to see actual impact? Who's going to? No one's going to leave. No one, Brother Rashid. You left, and you're still my brother in humanity. But honestly, do you see that there's a huge impact in people leaving? I don't see there's a huge impact. I will tell you, most of the people who claim to be religious are fake. They're not really religious. So it's pointless speaking to them about this. Linda Sarsour, for example, she's yelling. She's yelling. She raises her voice loud. Do you know in real Islamic Sharia, a lady cannot raise her voice in front of strange men? You know she wears makeup. A lady cannot wear makeup. She's wearing pink and red and colors. You cannot wear that in Islam. She's shaking hands, hugging politicians, Bernie Sanders. You can't do that in Islam. In real Islamic jurisprudence, that's not allowed. How can you? She's Palestinian and she's sitting with the Jews. You can, if you are really caring about the Palestinian cause, you will act like Hamas. But now she's sitting on an interfaith board. They're not real. This is an act. What's real is their hatred for you. That's what's real. For themselves, the Muslim youth and the imams, they will tell you, don't look at women. They are the first ones to go after women. You know, a religious, look, a man who is religious will not do that. Most of the men you have today, they come to the mosque, and Brother Rashid, he's lived through this. The Muslim men today will make their woman, she's 25, they'll make her look like a 40-year-old man. Wear black, don't put deodorant, don't do this to your eyebrows. Oh, astaghfirullah, wal-iyadhu billah, la la la. And then he goes out, he looks at all the blonde women. He looks at all of them. Right? So the issue is, we're dealing with hypocrisy that is rooted within our communities. And us telling them leave, he doesn't know what you're talking about. The guy doesn't wake up for Fajr to pray. What I say is, leave the violent parts within your belief system. Yes, Brother Rashid might want to debate them and say, yes, but the origin and the Khilafah, the guy might be Somalian or Malaysian, doesn't know the name of his Khalifa, doesn't know anything. They don't know. Why will I keep him busy about history if I can make him now sign a petition against CARE? That's all I need.
Imam Tawhidi, so because we have to wrap it up, and I actually want to comment and have you continue commenting. Everything you said about the women and how she behaves, etc., is very un-Islamic, and I completely agree with you. But you'd have to comment on the fact that, of course, in Islam you have taqiyya, and you also have rukhsa, dispensations. As long as what she's doing furthers the help of Islam, they'll let her put on makeup, they'll let her shake hands and all of this. So any comments on that?
Yes. Firstly, taqiyya belongs to us Shia. And the Sunnis, they have it, but it's very limited. they do allow it, but it's very limited. It belongs to the main. It was revived under Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, the 6th Shia Imam, and it was because the Shia Muslims were undergoing serious oppression from the rest of the Muslim world. And so if they were approached, they could lie about their faith and lie about their religion to maintain themselves, to maintain their lives.
War is deceit, Muhammad in general. You know, war is deceit.
Yes, no, but we're speaking taqiyya as a concept. Yeah. Taqiyya as a concept has many laws. Right. Taqiyya cannot be applied when there is safety. So it's just like tayammum, for example. Look, there's the kitman, there's tawriya, there's everything.
Okay, because we actually have 5 minutes, so thank you. Yeah. And I agree, there's different legal interpretations.
Can I comment on something?
Okay.
I disagree with you, Brother Imam Tawhidi, on the change that's happening. I believe in the power of changing minds and hearts. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. And I think you believe in that too. Otherwise, you will not be doing what you're doing. There are different changes. Probably you want to change them within Islam. I want to change them to a different worldview, probably. But I believe in the power of change, and I believe what can change one mind can change 1,000 minds, million minds, whatever. The number is not a problem. So if we are able, and I think ignorance is one of the problems. You said I don't want to teach people, but I think with the internet, with social media, with so many things are happening, people are getting to know the truth and getting to know.
Which is why I wrote a book.
Yes, and that's why you wrote a book. So I believe in the power of information to change people.
I agree. Quick, just I add to that. Okay. I'm not getting any younger, neither are you, or the reformists, or anybody else. I would like to make change that I can see and believe it will continue. I will not...
Realistic change.
Yeah, exactly. I want to see an actual change that I can feel, not spend 10, 20 years of my life going around hoping that, you know, it's going to happen one day, someone else might do it, but I did my job. No, no, no. I want to do something realistic and have everybody feel it, and I want my children to see the blessings of the change and live through that. Otherwise, it's going to be very difficult to have any change, because everybody here, all the reformists we had, 1,500 I can name in my book, right? Many reforms, starting from Hussein, the grandson of Muhammad. Nothing has been reformed, nothing has been changed. And they, trust me, some of them, they're scholars. You know, if it's about awareness, most of these intellectuals who are sitting in Georgetown University, right, they know the real history, and they know what democracy means, and they know how it violates the US Constitution. They don't change. They're the brightest people you have sitting in think tanks. They don't change. They defend the Muslim Brotherhood. So raising awareness doesn't really change. It's breaking their ego to think that I am Muslim, only my religion is right, and God is on my side no matter what you say, and I am certain because I'm certain, and I can't prove I'm certain, but I'm just certain. That ego needs to break. And for me, it broke when ISIS killed my family members. Right? Sometimes you need to approach it from that direction. You don't want other people to have ISIS kill their family members for them to wake, but if I wrote a book and I showed them what I had to go through, that connection, that 1 second of, you know, sympathy for me can wake people up, and it has. I have a good community now of 2,000 people that I return to after this in Australia.
Okay, thank you. I think we have time for one last question. It's not addressed to anyone, but I think I'll give it a go. The question is, the strength of the Islamic world comes from their economic strength. So, how can the world enforce or help modernize it, international rules and so forth, while the Arabs are so strong? So I actually disagree with that in one sense. For example, the problems that the West is having with Islamic radicals and so forth is very easy to actually defeat. It's all about, though, are we willing to do it? Is the West willing to do it? The reality is the Islamic world is immensely weak. It's only powerful because of Western apologists, Western enablers, Western entities that, for instance, let's look at Europe. It's being flooded, Western Europe, you know, the UK, Sweden, maybe Norway, and Germany, of course. is being flooded with Muslim migrants. And they behave according to the same ways they behave in the Islamic world. Sometimes they attack even Christian minorities in their midst, fellow refugees. They rape women because, well, they're just women. Why not? The same mentality exists. But if you look at Eastern Europe, well, they just said, no, we're not taking Muslims in. Problem solved, okay? So much of the issues that you're having is because of the West. You know, mosques, you can't, no surveillance, you have to be, because it's just like Christianity and Judaism, and therefore you have to let it go. And then you find out this mosque, that mosque, you have radicals teaching this, that, engage in terrorist activities. CARE itself, an indicted co-conspirator of the greatest, the largest terrorist funding case in the United States history, Holy Land Foundation, funneling money to Hamas. And here they are operating freely and having influence over the War College. So all of these shows you the Islamic world is not powerful. It's just being enabled by a lot of stupidity or something worse in the West. And even the economic issue, you'll say, well, they have oil and this and that. You know, it was Europeans who founded the oil. And we actually, and we have laws that can freeze assets when you have a country that is a terrorist country or organization. Saudi Arabia, which is our friend, has online fatwas by Bin Baz and these sorts. Islam itself is a spent, weak force. You close the door on it and it's finished. Thank you all for coming. We've reached the end. Thank you to my fellow panelists.